Let's get started. Story number 1.
Moving into a new house is always a mixture of excitement and anxiety. For Sarah and me, it was supposed to be a fresh start. We'd saved for years to afford a small, charming house in a quiet neighborhood just outside of town. It wasn't perfect. The roof needed repairs, and the basement smelled musty, but it was ours. After years of cramped apartments, it felt like a dream. The first few weeks were blissfully uneventful. We painted the walls, unpacked boxes, and made plans for the garden. I worked late at a local tech company, while Sarah, a freelance writer, spent most of her time at home. She would often text me about her progress on her latest project, usually something about history or folklore. It wasn't until the fourth week that things began to feel off. One evening, I came home to find Sarah unusually quiet. She was sitting at the kitchen table, her laptop open but untouched. I kissed her on the cheek and asked how her day was. She hesitated before saying, "Did you come home during lunch?" I shook my head. "No, I was at the office. Why?" She looked troubled. "I could have sworn I heard someone moving around upstairs. Footsteps. I thought it was you, but when I called out, no one answered." I shrugged, trying to reassure her. "It's an old house, probably just the floor settling." She seemed to accept it, but I could see the worry lingering in her eyes. I didn't think much more about it until a few nights later. We were in bed when I woke up to a thud downstairs. I nudged Sarah awake and strained to hear. There it was again, a dull, rhythmic thumping coming from the living room. I grabbed a baseball bat from the closet and crept down the stairs, my pulse racing. When I reached the living room, I flipped on the light. Nothing. The room was exactly as we'd left it. I checked the doors and windows. Everything was locked. I convinced myself it was just a raccoon on the porch or something. I went back to bed, telling Sarah it was nothing. The next day, I noticed something strange. One of the picture frames on the mantel was turned backward. I asked Sarah if she'd moved it, but she hadn't. It seemed like a small thing, but the unease started to build. That night, as we were falling asleep, we heard the footsteps again, slow and deliberate, moving down the hallway outside our bedroom. I shot up in bed, gripping the bat. Sarah squeezed my arm, her breathing shallow. I opened the door, expecting to see an intruder, but the hallway was empty. We tried to laugh it off in the morning. Maybe it was just our imaginations. But as the days went on, it became harder to ignore. One night, I came home late to find the front door wide open. I rushed inside, calling for Sarah. I found her in the living room, pale and shaking. "Did you leave the door open?" I asked. She shook her head. "I heard it unlock and swing open by itself. I swear I saw someone standing on the porch, but when I looked again, it was empty." I checked every room, every closet, but no one was there. That night, I barely slept, lying awake, straining to hear anything unusual. A few days later, Sarah called me at work, her voice trembling. "Someone was in the house," she whispered. "I heard them talking. I locked myself in the bathroom." I sped home, my mind racing. When I arrived, Sarah was still in the bathroom, tears streaming down her face. I searched the house again. Nothing, no sign of anyone. I called the police, but they found no evidence of a break-in. They suggested it could be stress or paranoia, but I knew Sarah wasn't imagining things. Neither was I. That night, I set up a baby monitor in the hallway, hoping to catch whatever was making the noise. Around 2 a.m., the footsteps returned. I could hear them through the monitor, slow, heavy steps. I checked the live feed on my phone, and for a brief moment, I saw something, a figure moving past the doorway, barely visible in the dim light. I ran into the hallway, but it was empty. The air was icy, and I could see my breath. We tried to live with it, but things kept escalating. Objects moved, lights flickered, and the whispers started. Sometimes I would wake up to the sound of Sarah's voice, only to find her sound asleep next to me. One night she woke up gasping, saying someone had whispered into her ear, "Get out." Desperate, I started researching the house's history. I found an old newspaper article online. Decades ago, a family had lived here, a mother and her 2 sons. One night, the mother, plagued by paranoia and convinced that someone was stalking them, locked herself and the boys inside. Days later, neighbors reported a foul smell. The police broke in to find the boys dead and the mother hanging in the living room. They ruled it a murder-suicide, attributing it to her deteriorating mental state. I didn't tell Sarah about the story. I didn't want to scare her even more. Instead, I contacted a paranormal investigator named David, who agreed to come the next evening. When he arrived, he immediately noted the cold spots and the feeling of being watched. He set up audio recorders and motion detectors, and we waited. Around midnight, the activity began. Footsteps, whispers, and then, the most horrifying part, a loud, violent banging from the walls, like someone trapped inside. The motion detector went off in the hallway, but when we checked the camera, nothing was there. David played back the audio, and we heard it clearly. A woman's voice, desperate and terrified, repeating the word, "leave." David explained that sometimes traumatic events leave a mark, an imprint that repeats itself. He believed the mother's fear and paranoia had somehow infected the house. He performed a cleansing ritual, urging the spirits to move on. For a moment, the house felt lighter, the air less oppressive. For the next few weeks, things were calm. We started to believe it was over. Then one evening, as we were preparing dinner, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The picture frame on the mantel, backward again. As I approached it, the lights flickered, and I heard it, a soft, pleading whisper right behind me. "Don't trust him." That night, we packed our essentials and left. We never spent another night in that house. A month later, the new owners contacted me, asking if we'd ever experienced anything strange. I didn't have the heart to tell them. Instead, I wished them luck and hung up. Sometimes I still think about that night, the voice warning me not to trust David. I never found out why. Part of me wonders if something darker than just a restless spirit was in that house. I'll never know for sure. But one thing I do know. I'll never ignore that feeling of being watched again. Story, the end.
Story number 2.
It started with the phone calls. The first time it happened, I had just put my son, Ethan, to bed. It was a little past 9 p.m., and the house was quiet, except for the distant hum of the dishwasher. My husband, Dan, was working the night shift, so it was just Ethan and me. I had settled onto the couch with a book when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Normally, I'd ignore it, but something about being alone made me uneasy. Hello? Silence. Then breathing. Soft, steady breathing, just close enough to the phone that I knew it was intentional. I hung up immediately, my heart pounding. It was probably a prank, I told myself. But still, I double-checked the locks on the doors before returning to the couch. An hour later, the phone rang again. Same number. This time, I let it go to voicemail. When I checked the message, my stomach turned. More breathing. But this time, just before the line went dead, a whisper. "I see you." I shot up from the couch, every hair on my body standing on end. My first instinct was to check on Ethan. I crept upstairs, heart pounding, and slowly pushed his bedroom door open. He was fine. Sound asleep, his little chest rising and falling peacefully. I backed away and closed the door softly, then returned to my own bedroom, locking it behind me. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I brushed it off. I told myself it had to be some prank or a wrong number. But I couldn't shake the unease settling in my gut. Dan called around noon to check in. "You okay?" he asked, his voice tired. "Yeah," I lied, but that was before the knocking started. That night, after Ethan was asleep, I was in the kitchen washing dishes when I heard it. 3 slow, deliberate knocks at the front door. Knock. 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 I froze, dish still in hand. No one was supposed to be coming over. Max, our golden retriever, was in the living room, his ears perked up. But he didn't bark. He didn't move. Slowly, I stepped toward the door and peeked through the peephole. Nothing. The porch was empty. I exhaled, my breath shaky. Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe I was just on edge from the phone calls. I turned away. Knock. Knock. A little louder this time. Max let out a low whimper. His tail was tucked, his body tense. Something about that terrified me more than the knocking itself. Max barked at everything. The mailman, squirrels, the neighbor's cat. But this? He was scared. I took a deep breath and checked the peephole again. Still nothing. I backed away, my mind racing, and then knock! 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 From the back door, a sharp, icy chill went down my spine. I turned slowly, my pulse roaring in my ears. The back door was glass, leading out to the fenced yard. I hadn't turned on the porch light, so I couldn't see anything outside, but I could feel something, watching, waiting. Max growled low in his throat. I forced myself to move, reaching for my phone. My fingers trembled as I dialed Dan. "Hey," he answered, his voice groggy. "Someone's outside," I whispered. Silence. Then, "Call the police. Now." Before I could, something slammed against the glass, a heavy, deliberate impact. I screamed and stumbled backward, my phone clattering to the floor. Max was barking wildly now, hackles raised. I grabbed my phone and ran upstairs, straight into Ethan's room. He was awake, blinking up at me with sleepy confusion. "Mommy?" he mumbled. I didn't answer. I just locked the door and called 911. The operator's voice was calm, but I was anything but. I whispered frantically, telling her that someone was outside, that they had knocked at both doors. "Stay on the line," she instructed. "Officers are on their way." Minutes passed in tense silence. I held Ethan close, listening for any sound outside the room. Then, footsteps. Inside the house. I nearly dropped the phone. "They're inside," I breathed. "Stay where you are. Help is coming." The footsteps were slow, deliberate, moving through the downstairs, heading toward the stairs. Then I heard something else. A whisper. Soft. Faint. "Mommy?" It wasn't Ethan. My blood turned to ice. The voice came from the hallway. Right outside the door. I clapped a hand over Ethan's mouth, my own breath hitching in terror. Then the doorknob twisted. Once. Twice. Rattling, harder now. Then it stopped. Heavy silence. And then, just as the sirens blared in the distance, I heard it, a long, slow laugh. Not human, not quite, something else. By the time the police arrived, the house was empty. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, nothing. Just my word and my son's fear. But I know what I heard. And worse, I know it's not over. Because every few nights, just before bed, Ethan will look toward the dark hallway and whisper, "He's still here." Story the end.
Story number 3.
It started with a knock at the front door. Not the casual rap of a neighbor or the friendly thud of a package delivery. This was different. It came in 3 slow, deliberate beats, each one vibrating through the wood like it carried some unseen weight. It was just past 2:30 a.m., and the house had been silent except for the occasional creaks of settling wood. Sarah sat up in bed, her heart instantly hammering. She glanced at the clock on her nightstand, the dim glow of the numbers burning into her retinas. Who the hell would be knocking at this hour? Next to her, Mark stirred but didn't wake. She considered waking him, but something about the knock rooted her to the bed. She strained her ears, listening for another sound. Was it the wind? No, the knocks had been too precise, too heavy. A few seconds passed, and then 3 more knocks. Sarah swung her legs over the side of the bed and stepped into the hallway, moving carefully. She didn't want to make noise. A lifetime of true crime documentaries had drilled into her the importance of silence in situations like this. She tiptoed past the bedroom where their son, Lucas, lay sleeping. The thought of him being in danger sent a shiver down her spine. As she reached the staircase, she hesitated. The foyer below was dark except for the faint glow of the porch light filtering through the frosted glass. The shape of a figure stood just beyond it, and someone was there. She gripped the banister, her pulse hammering in her ears, and then she heard it. Not another knock, a whisper, from inside the house. Sarah turned sharply, her breath catching. It had come from the living room, just off to the right beyond her view from the staircase. She wanted to scream for Mark, to rush back up the stairs and lock the bedroom doors, but her body betrayed her. She remained frozen, listening. The whisper came again, low and unintelligible, this like the rustling of fabric or the scrape of bare feet against the wooden floor. Sarah moved, step by step, down the stairs. The figure outside knocked again. 3 deliberate thuds. Something was wrong. She reached the bottom and slowly leaned to peek around the corner into the living room. Empty. The room was dark, shadows stretched unnaturally long in the dim light. The whisper was gone. She turned back toward the door. The figure was no longer there. A chill swept through her, raising the hairs on the back of her neck. Then a sound from upstairs. Lucas. A single sharp cry from his room. Sarah bolted, taking the steps 2 at a time. As she reached the hallway, she saw his door slightly ajar. She had closed it before bed. She knew she had. Heart pounding, she pushed it open. Lucas sat up in bed, his tiny face scrunched with confusion. "Mommy?" She rushed to him, smoothing his hair. "It's okay, baby. Go back to sleep." He blinked sleepily. The man was here. Sarah felt her stomach drop. What man? Lucas turned his head, glancing toward the darkened corner of the room. She followed his gaze. Nothing. The silence was suffocating. "Go back to sleep," she whispered, tucking him in. She left his room but didn't go back to bed. Instead, she stood in the hallway, staring down the stairs, listening. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Silence. Eventually, exhaustion pulled her back to bed. She told herself it had been a bad dream, that maybe the knocking had been a tree branch or an animal. She didn't know then that the nightmare was just beginning. The next night, she set up a baby monitor in Lucas's room. Mark, ever the skeptic, teased her but let her do it. She stayed up later than usual watching TV in bed, the volume low. Mark was already asleep. At 2:34 a.m., the knocking came again. Sarah sat up, heart hammering, 3 deliberate thuds. Then a new sound, static. The baby monitor. She turned to look. The screen showed Lucas's room, bathed in the dim blue glow of his nightlight. The crib was visible. Lucas lay still, but something moved in the corner. A shadow, not a person, something darker. It pulsed, shifted. Sarah couldn't breathe. Then, through the monitor, a voice. "Let me in," she screamed. Mark shot up beside her. "The monitor," she gasped, but when she looked back, the screen was normal. Lucas, sleeping peacefully. The side, no shadow. Mark checked the whole house, the locks, the yard. Nothing, no one. Sarah barely slept. She felt it now like a presence looming in the house, and she was right. The third night, Mark stayed up with her. He wasn't laughing anymore. 2:30 a.m. came. Silence. Then the baby monitor flared to life. Lucas's soft breathing, and then the sound of another breath. A wet, rasping inhale. Mark grabbed the bat from under the bed and bolted for Lucas's room. Sarah was right behind him. They burst in. Lucas was asleep. The closet door stood open. It had been closed before. Mark rushed to it, throwing it open. Empty. No, not empty. Something wasn't right. The air inside the closet was colder than the rest of the room. A foul smell, like rotting earth, seeped from the darkness. Sarah grabbed Lucas, holding him close. Mark stepped inside the closet, running his hand along the back wall. His fingers brushed something. Fabric. No. A coat? A coat that shouldn't be there, and under it, flesh. Something grabbed him. A hand, icy and clawed, latched onto his wrist. Mark yelled, yanking back. The closet door slammed shut on its own. Sarah screamed. Mark stumbled back, his wrist burning like frostbite had kissed his skin. Then, through the door, 3 slow knocks. From inside the closet. They left that night, checked into a motel. By morning, they called a priest. The house had to be cleansed, they said. But when they returned, the closet door was open, and inside, carved deep into the wood, was a message. 3 words. "Let me in." Sarah burned the baby monitor. They moved a month later. But even now, sometimes at 2:30 a.m., Sarah wakes to knocking from inside the walls. Story the end.
Story number 4.
I used to think ghosts were just stories. Tales passed down to scare kids around a campfire. That was before I moved into the old house on Sycamore Street. It was supposed to be a new beginning, affordable, spacious, and perfect for starting over after my divorce. The neighborhood was quiet, and the house, though a bit run down, had charm I couldn't resist. The first few days were uneventful. I was busy unpacking and setting up my office in the spare room. As an illustrator, I often worked late into the night, and the isolation suited me just fine. I liked the sound of the wind through the old trees outside and the creaking of the floorboards as the house settled. It felt lived in, like a place with history. It wasn't until the third night that I started noticing the noises, footsteps in the hallway when I knew I was alone. At first, I brushed it off. The house was old, and old houses made noise. But it kept happening. One night, as I sat sketching, I distinctly heard someone walking up the stairs. I froze, listening. The footsteps stopped right outside my office door. I mustered the courage to open it, half expecting to see an intruder. Nothing, just the dimly lit hallway and the echo of my own breathing. I laughed it off, trying to shake the uneasy feeling. The following week, I started finding things out of place. My keys would end up on the opposite side of the room from where I left them. A mug I swore I washed and put away would be back on the counter, dirty. One morning, I found my sketchbook on the floor, pages smeared with what looked like muddy fingerprints. I lived alone. It didn't make sense. One evening, I heard a loud crash downstairs. My heart pounded as I grabbed a kitchen knife and crept down, certain I would find a broken window or evidence of a break-in. Instead, I found my dining room chairs pulled away from the table, arranged in a perfect circle. In the center was my old teddy bear from childhood, which I had stored in a box in the attic. Its head was twisted backward. I wanted to believe it was some elaborate prank. But who would do that? I didn't know anyone in town yet. I couldn't sleep that night, jumping at every little sound. Around 3 a.m., I heard a whisper, soft, almost too faint to make out. It was coming from the hallway. I strained to listen, but the words were incoherent, like a distant conversation I wasn't meant to hear. The next morning, I called a locksmith and had every lock in the house changed. I convinced myself it was some sick joke by the previous owner or a squatter I hadn't yet discovered. That night, I bolted the doors, double-checked the windows, and slept with the knife by my bed. Around midnight, I awoke to the sound of my office chair rolling across the floor. My heart raced as I tiptoed down the hall. I peeked in to find the chair pushed against the window as if someone had been sitting there, watching the street. I was certain I hadn't left it that way. Then I noticed something even stranger. On my desk, someone had drawn in my sketchbook, hastily scribbled lines, dark and jagged. The drawing looked like a figure standing at the end of my bed, featureless and looming. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages. There were more drawings. My house from different angles, all drawn in a style I didn't recognize. I slammed the book shut and forced myself to sleep, telling myself it was stress. A few days later, I found myself in the local library digging through old newspapers. I needed to know who had lived there before me. An elderly librarian helped me track down some records. As she squinted at the microfilm, her face grew pale. "Your house," she whispered. "It belonged to the McCormick family. They had a boy, a troubled one. One night, he attacked his mother and sister with a knife. When the police arrived, they found him in his room, muttering nonsense, covered in mud as if he'd been outside. But the windows were locked from the inside. The mother survived, but the boy, he was never quite right after that." I left the library feeling colder than the December wind outside. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every noise seemed amplified, the creaking walls, the rattling windows. I decided to leave the house and sleep at a motel, but as I reached for my keys, I froze. The whispering was back, louder and closer. My phone buzzed on the counter, a text from an unknown number. I hesitated before opening it. The message read, "Don't leave. He'll follow." I dropped the phone, my pulse pounding. I didn't know what to do. The lights flickered, and I heard footsteps pounding down the hall. They stopped right outside my bedroom door. I braced myself, gripping the knife, but the door never opened. Instead, the handle jiggled as if someone was trying to force it. I didn't sleep at all. At dawn, I packed my essentials and drove to my sister's place 2 towns over. I told her everything, and though she looked skeptical, she let me crash on her couch. That night, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was just stressed, imagining things. Maybe the texts were a prank. But just as I was starting to relax, my phone buzzed again. The same number. "You can't run. It's his house." I didn't sleep for days. My sister begged me to see a therapist. I agreed, hoping to find some rational explanation. But before I could make the appointment, she called me at work, terrified. "I heard someone whispering in the guest room last night," she said. "And your sketchbook. It's on the floor, open to that drawing, the one of the figure by the bed." I hadn't brought the sketchbook with me. I knew then that whatever haunted that house wasn't bound to the building itself. It had latched onto me. The final straw came one night when I woke up in my sister's guest room to find the same muddy footprints on the floor, leading from the window to my bed. In the corner of the room stood a dark figure, motionless, watching me. I blinked, and it was gone. But the whisper lingered, soft and cold. "You can't leave." That night, I burned the sketchbook and moved again, across the state this time. I changed my number and never told anyone my new address. It's been over a year, but sometimes when I'm alone late at night, I hear the whisper, just faintly, reminding me that no matter where I go, I'll never truly be alone. Story the end.
Story number 5.
It started with the knocking. At first, it was so quiet I thought I'd imagined it. A soft rapping at the front door, barely audible over the late-night hum of the refrigerator and the occasional groan of the old house settling. I was in the living room, wrapped in a blanket on the couch, half asleep while some horror movie flickered on the screen. It was past midnight, and I was home alone. My husband, Mark, was away on a work trip, leaving me and our golden retriever, Max, to hold down the fort. Max lifted his head from the rug, ears pricked, his tail twitching uncertainly. The knock came again, a little louder this time, but still restrained, hesitant. I sat up, a strange unease prickling at my skin. Nobody should be knocking at this hour. My first thought was that it could be a neighbor. Maybe someone needed help. But why so late? And why so soft, as if they didn't truly want to be heard? I grabbed my phone and got up, moving toward the door. My heart thudded as I peeked through the peephole. The porch light was on, but all I saw was an empty front step. No one was there. I hesitated, then turned the deadbolt just to be safe. Max was on his feet now, his body tense. His hackles rose slightly, and he let out a low, uncertain growl. And then I heard it, not from the front door, from the back of the house. A scratchy, deliberate sound against the glass sliding door that led to the backyard. I froze. My breath caught in my throat as my stomach clenched painfully. Someone was trying to get in. I turned toward the kitchen where the sliding door was located, but I didn't move closer. My body refused. Instead, I strained my ears, listening. The sound came again, slow, dragging like fingernails gliding down the glass. Max barked, his deep, protective voice shattering the silence. The scratching stopped. For a long moment, everything was quiet, except for Max's panting and my own shaky breaths. I forced myself to move, inching toward the kitchen with my phone clutched tightly in one hand. I didn't turn on the lights. Something about the darkness outside, pressing against the glass, made me afraid to see what might be looking in. I reached the doorway and peered around the corner, my fingers hovering over the emergency call button. The porch light barely illuminated the backyard, casting long, eerie shadows. The glass door reflected the dim interior of the house, making it difficult to see beyond it. But then, a shape. A dark, human-shaped figure just outside the door, standing completely still, watching. I gasped and stumbled back. My thumb pressed down on the emergency call button, but before I could hit dial, the figure vanished. One moment it was there, and the next, it wasn't. I blinked rapidly, my pulse hammering. Max barked again, his body rigid. "Who's there?" I called, my voice stronger than I felt. No answer, just silence. I turned on the backyard floodlights, and suddenly the yard was bathed in bright white light. Nothing, no footprints in the frost-covered grass, no sign of movement, just the empty backyard, quiet and undisturbed. My fingers trembled as I hovered over the call button. Should I call the police? Would they even take me seriously? A sudden sound behind me made me spin around. A whisper of movement, a soft creak from the hallway. Max whirled too, his growl deepening. But the hallway was empty. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. Had someone gotten inside? But how? I moved cautiously toward the hallway, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst from my chest. I reached out and flicked on the light. Nothing. Just the hallway leading to the bedrooms, the doors all slightly ajar just as I'd left them. But something felt wrong. The air was too still, too heavy. And then a whisper. A faint, almost inaudible sound. My name. Breathed out in the darkness, every muscle in my body locked up, my vision blurred with terror. I wasn't alone. The realization sent a cold shock through me. My fingers gripped my phone so tightly my knuckles ached. I needed to get out. I turned, ready to grab my keys and run for the car. And then every single light in the house went out. The sudden darkness swallowed me whole. Max barked wildly, his claws scrambling on the hardwood. The power was gone. My breathing turned ragged as I tried to think, tried to focus. My phone screen was the only source of light now, casting a weak glow on my trembling hands. I turned on the flashlight and swung it toward the hallway. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing the open bedroom doors and the shadow standing at the end of the hall. Tall, still, watching me. My throat tightened in a silent scream. Then it moved, a sudden lurching movement toward me. I didn't think. I ran. I bolted toward the front door, fumbling with the locks, my hands slick with sweat. Max was beside me, growling and barking in a frenzy. The moment the deadbolt slid free, I wrenched the door open and stumbled onto the porch, gasping for air. The cold night air hit me like a slap. I turned, expecting someone, to be right behind me. But there was nothing. The house was silent. Max panted at my side, his body trembling. I stood there, barefoot on the icy porch, staring into the house, waiting. And then, as I watched, the hallway light flickered back on. Not all the lights. Just that one, illuminating the empty hall, as if nothing had happened. I didn't go back inside. I called Mark, my voice shaking so badly I could barely get the words out. I called my sister, who lived 10 minutes away, and she came to get me. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, Mark cut his trip short and came home. We checked every lock, every window. Nothing was broken, no signs of forced entry, but I knew what I had seen, what I had felt, and I knew I was never truly alone in that house again. Story the end.
Story number 6.
The first time it happened, Lauren convinced herself it was nothing. She had been home alone, curled up on the couch with a glass of wine and a book, when she heard the noise. A faint scraping sound, like something being dragged across the hardwood floor. It came from the kitchen. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. The house was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the clock above the fireplace. Then it came again. Scrape. Slow, deliberate. She set her wine glass down, her heart pounding. The back door was locked, she had checked. The front door too, and the windows. Lauren stood, her bare feet soundless against the rug, and crept toward the kitchen. The scraping stopped. She flipped the light on, expecting... What? A raccoon that had somehow gotten inside? A branch against the window? Nothing. Everything was exactly as she had left it. The chairs were tucked in. The floor was spotless. The door was still locked. Maybe she imagined it. Maybe it was just the house settling. She laughed at herself, shaking her head, and returned to the couch. An hour later she went to bed, locking the bedroom door behind her. That was the first night. The second night, she heard the footsteps. It was nearly 3 a.m. when the sound woke her, a soft creaking coming from the hallway outside her bedroom. Lauren bolted upright in bed, her skin prickling with cold fear. She strained her ears, barely breathing. Another step, a slow, measured step. She reached for her phone on the nightstand, her fingers trembling. She considered calling the police, but hesitated. What would she even say? That she thought she heard footsteps? That she was alone and scared? She slid out of bed as quietly as she could and pressed her ear against the bedroom door. Silence. Then, a faint breath, right outside. She stumbled backward, her heart hammering so hard she thought she might pass out. She stood frozen for what felt like forever. She waited. Listened. Nothing. When she finally got the courage to open the door, the hallway was empty. She left the light on for the rest of the night. On the third night, she saw him. She was brushing her teeth before bed when something shifted in the mirror. Not behind her. In the reflection itself. A shadow standing just beyond the bathroom door. She spun around, toothpaste foaming in her mouth. No one was there. But when she turned back to the mirror, the figure remained. Tall, thin, a man, his face obscured by darkness, standing in the hallway, staring at her through the reflection. Lauren choked on a scream, spinning around again, this time lunging for the door. Nothing, just an empty hallway. She didn't sleep that night. She couldn't. By the fourth night, she was exhausted. She had barely eaten, barely slept. She considered staying at a friend's place, but it felt ridiculous to explain why. What was she going to say? I think there's a shadow in my house. Instead, she called her brother Chris. Something's weird here, she told him, pacing the kitchen. I swear I hear things at night, and last night I saw someone. Like an actual person? Chris sounded skeptical. Yes. No, I don't know. He wasn't there, but he was in the mirror. Silence on the other end. Have you checked the house? Like, really checked? He asked finally. Windows, doors, everything. Nothing's broken. No signs of a break-in. Chris sighed. Look, I can come over. Stay the night. Would that help? Relief flooded through her. Yeah, that would help. He showed up an hour later, armed with a baseball bat and his usual confidence. All right, sis, I'll sleep on the couch. If anything happens, wake me up. For the first time in days, Lauren felt safe. She fell asleep faster than she expected. At 2:46 a.m., she woke up. Something was wrong. The house was too quiet. She sat up in bed, ears straining. A sound drifted up from downstairs, soft, shuffling. Then a whisper, low, indistinct. Lauren's stomach twisted. She climbed out of bed, moving carefully to the door. The whispering continued. She stepped into the hallway, her hands shaking. Chris, she called softly. No response. She crept down the stairs, gripping the banister so tightly her knuckles ached. The living room was dark. Chris was on the couch, his body still under the blanket. The whispering came from behind the couch. Lauren froze. Someone was standing there. A shape just barely visible in the darkness, too tall, too thin. It leaned over Chris, its face inches from his, whispering. Lauren gasped. Chris shot up, swinging blindly. What the? The shadow melted away. Gone. Just like that. Chris scrambled for the light, eyes wild. What the hell was that? Lauren was shaking. You saw it? He swallowed hard, his face pale. Yeah. They stayed up until sunrise, neither of them speaking. Chris didn't question her anymore. By the fifth night, Lauren couldn't take it. She packed a bag, called a locksmith to check the house, and made plans to leave for a few days. That night, she double-checked everything. She locked every door, every window. She turned on every light. And then, at exactly 3 a.m., the TV in the living room flickered on by itself. White static. Lauren's stomach dropped. A voice crackled through the speakers. Not words, just a whisper, a long, drawn-out breath. Then, 3 soft knocks on the front door. She didn't move, didn't breathe. The knocks came again. Then the doorknob turned, slowly, deliberately. Lauren grabbed her phone with trembling hands, dialing 911. The operator answered, but before she could speak, a sound made her blood run cold. A click. The front door unlocked. Lauren dropped the phone and ran. She sprinted to the back door, but as she reached for the handle, a voice whispered directly into her ear. "Don't go," she screamed. Chris found her the next morning, huddled in her car in the driveway, sobbing. The front door was still locked. The house was empty. Nothing was missing. No signs of a break-in. But in the middle of the living room floor, something had been placed there. Lauren's necklace. One she had lost months ago. She never went back. She sold the house within weeks. To this day, she doesn't know who or what was inside with her, and she never wants to find out. Story the end.
Story number 7.
I never used to believe in ghosts. Not really. I always figured that strange noises at night could be blamed on old pipes or the house settling. But after what happened that winter, I know better. And worse than ghosts, I know that sometimes the living can be just as terrifying. It started on a Thursday night in the middle of December. My husband, Eric, was out of town for work, leaving me alone in the house with our 2-year-old daughter, Lily. We had recently moved to a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of town, where the houses sat on large plots of land separated by dense patches of trees. It was peaceful, a far cry from the city noise we were used to. But on nights like this, that isolation felt suffocating. The day had been uneventful. I put Lily to bed around 8 p.m., then curled up in the living room with a glass of wine, half watching a crime show while scrolling through my phone. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, making the house creak. Then I heard it, a faint knock at the front door. I froze, my glass hovering midair. It was almost 10 p.m. Who the hell would be knocking at this hour? I put the glass down and stood up, my heart beginning to race. I checked the baby monitor. Lily was still sound asleep. I walked toward the front door as quietly as possible, straining to hear. Another knock, soft, almost hesitant. My fingers trembled as I pulled back the curtain and peeked through the small window beside the door. No one was there. My breath hitched. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it was just the wind shaking the porch railing. I waited for a moment, then turned back toward the living room. Knock. This time it came from the back door. I stopped in my tracks. My entire body went cold. No. There was no way someone could have gotten from the front porch to the backyard that fast. The backyard was fenced and there were no gates. The only way back there was through the house or through the woods. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. I walked cautiously toward the sliding glass door in the kitchen, barely breathing. The backyard was completely dark, the porch light casting only a dim glow over the wooden deck. I pressed my face close to the glass, trying to see beyond the reflection. Nothing. Then Max, our golden retriever, let out a deep guttural growl from the living room. I spun around so fast my phone nearly slipped from my hand. Max was standing rigid near the front door, his ears pinned back, his lips curled. He was staring at something I couldn't see. I swallowed hard, my pulse hammering. "Max?" I whispered. He didn't move. Then suddenly his growl stopped. His ears perked, his tail lowered, and then he wagged, like he recognized someone. I didn't have time to process that before I heard the floor creak upstairs. My stomach dropped. Lily, I ran. Taking the stairs 2 at a time, I nearly tripped in my panic. My only thought was getting to my daughter. I burst into her room, flipping on the light. She was still in her crib, eyes barely open, stirring from sleep. Nothing was out of place. Except the closet door. It was open, just a few inches. It had been closed when I put her to bed. I was sure of it. I stood there, my breath coming in shallow gasps, my ears straining. Silence. I took one shaky step forward, then another. I reached for the door and, with a trembling hand, pushed it open. The closet was empty. Just Lily's tiny clothes hanging in neat rows, her stuffed animals lined up on the shelf. But something felt wrong. The air inside was cold, like someone had just been in there. I backed away slowly, my pulse still racing. "Mommy?" Lily mumbled sleepily. I forced a smile, tucking the blanket around her. "It's okay, baby. Go back to sleep." She blinked up at me, then her gaze drifted past me to the closet. "Man," she murmured. A bolt of ice shot through my veins. "What?" My voice barely worked. "The man," she said simply. I couldn't breathe. "There's no man, sweetheart," I whispered, brushing her hair back. She just yawned and rolled onto her side, already drifting off. I stood there for a long time, staring at the closet, willing myself to move. Finally, I stepped forward and shut the door, firmly. Then I turned on the small nightlight, grabbed the baby monitor, and left the room, closing her door behind me. I didn't go back downstairs. I locked myself in my bedroom, keeping my phone clutched in my hand all night. By morning, I had convinced myself that it had all been my imagination. The knocking, the noise upstairs, even Lily's strange comment. It was all just a mix of paranoia and exhaustion. But then I checked the security camera. We had one above the front porch, facing the yard and the driveway. The footage showed me sitting on the couch, scrolling on my phone. Then at 9:57 p.m., a shadow moved at the edge of the screen. I rewound and hit pause, my breath catching in my throat. A man, standing just at the tree line, watching the house. He was there for nearly 10 minutes, just standing. Then, at exactly 10:08 p.m., he stepped forward, moving toward the house. And then the screen glitched. For the next 5 minutes, the footage was nothing but static. When the camera came back on, the porch was empty. I checked the backyard camera. Same thing. At 10:09 p.m., there was a blur of movement, then static. When the footage resumed, there was no sign of him. I checked the indoor cameras. We had one in the living room, mostly to keep an eye on Max when we weren't home. At 10:10 p.m., Max suddenly stood up and stared at the front door. His tail wagged slightly, like he recognized someone. Then, the camera glitched again. When it came back on, Max was lying back down, the house silent. No sign of anyone. I felt sick. There had been someone outside, and somehow, in the span of just a few minutes, they had managed to disappear. Or worse, they had gotten inside. I called the police immediately. An officer came by and checked everything. No signs of forced entry, no footprints in the snow. Nothing. He told me it was probably just a technical glitch on the cameras. But I know what I saw, and I know what Lily saw. We stayed at my sister's house until Eric came home. He didn't believe me at first, thought it was just a mix of exhaustion and paranoia. But then, 2 nights later, he heard it too. A knock. Soft. From inside the house. Story the end.
Story number 8.
I had always been a logical person. Someone who believed in science and dismissive of anything that seemed to veer into the realm of the supernatural. Ghosts, spirits, and haunted houses were things I enjoyed reading about for fun. But I never believed they had any real power over our lives. That is, until I moved into the old farmhouse on the outskirts of town. The house was beautiful, in a slightly rundown kind of way. Built in the early 1900s, it had a charm that modern homes lacked. The wide, creaky floorboards, the old wooden beams in the ceiling, and the large windows that overlooked the overgrown garden all made it seem like a place frozen in time. When I saw it, I immediately felt a strange pull, and I knew I had to live there. I needed a change, a fresh start, after the end of my long-term relationship. The house felt like the perfect escape. The first few weeks were perfect. I spent my time cleaning the place up, settling in, and restoring the vintage furniture I found in various antique stores around town. The house, despite its age, had a sense of warmth to it. The rooms had an inviting, cozy feel, and the smell of old wood and fresh paint filled the air. It felt like my home. But things started to shift about a month into living there. I didn't think much of it at first, but looking back, the signs were there from the beginning. It began with the lights. Every once in a while, one of the light bulbs in the hallway or the kitchen would flicker and buzz before going out completely. It was the kind of thing you'd brush off as faulty wiring. I had even called an electrician to check the wiring, but he assured me everything was fine. Then came the footsteps. Soft, slow, deliberate footsteps that would echo through the hallway in the dead of night. At first, I thought I was hearing things. Maybe it was the house settling, as old houses tend to do. But it kept happening. Every night around 2 a.m., I would hear footsteps walking past my bedroom door, followed by the creaking of the floorboards. My heart would race, and I'd lie in bed, frozen, waiting for the sound to stop. But it always continued, soft and steady, as though someone was pacing through the house, waiting. I didn't have anyone else in the house, and I knew I wasn't imagining it. The footsteps were real. I considered calling a neighbor to ask if they had heard anything, but I dismissed it. What could I say? Hey, have you heard someone walking through my house at night? That would be ridiculous. One evening, I decided to confront the strange sounds. I had just come home from work, and the house was quiet. The sun had set, casting long shadows across the floor, and the air was heavy with an odd sense of anticipation. I walked into the kitchen, grabbed a glass of water, and sat down at the table, staring out the window into the overgrown garden. The footsteps came again. This time, I was determined to figure out what was happening. I stood up, my pulse quickening, and crept toward the hallway, the sound of my own breath filling my ears. The footsteps were unmistakable. Someone, or something, was moving through the house. I was sure of it. I made my way toward the stairs, which creaked beneath my feet, and peered up into the dark hallway. The sounds had stopped. I waited, holding my breath, listening for any sign of movement. The silence stretched on, thick and unnerving. Then, just as I was about to turn back, I saw it. At the end of the hallway, in the dim light, a shadow moved. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. The figure seemed to be standing in the corner, its form blurry and distorted, like something out of the corner of your eye that you can never quite focus on. My stomach twisted into a knot, and I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure was gone, as quickly as it had appeared. I stood there for a moment, trying to rationalize what I had just seen. My mind raced. Had it been a trick of the light? Perhaps a shadow cast by the wind blowing the trees outside? But the chill that crept up my spine told me otherwise. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I kept replaying what had happened in my mind, trying to make sense of it, but the unease settled in, deeper than before. I felt like I wasn't alone in the house anymore. The following days were filled with an eerie tension. I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching me. I began to notice more things. Objects were out of place. The books on the shelf would be rearranged, the kitchen chairs would be pulled out, and my once organized desk was in disarray. At first, I thought it was my imagination, or perhaps I was just being forgetful. But it kept happening. The lights began flickering more frequently, and the house grew colder. No matter how high I turned the thermostat, there was an unnatural chill that seemed to settle into every room. I started wearing extra layers just to stay warm, but nothing helped. The cold came from within the walls, seeping into my bones. Then came the whispers. I first heard them one evening as I sat on the couch reading a book. At first, it was just a faint murmur in the background, like the sound of someone talking just out of earshot. I paused, listening, but the sound stopped. I convinced myself it was nothing, just the wind outside or a car passing by. But the whispers continued, growing louder and more distinct over time. One night, I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when I heard them again. The whispers were close now, as if someone was standing just behind me. My blood ran cold as I turned, expecting to see someone there, but the room was empty. The whispers continued, growing louder, almost as if they were right in my ear. I froze, my heart racing, my body paralyzed with fear. The voice was low, distorted, but unmistakably clear. "Get out." I spun around, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The voice sounded so close, as though someone was standing directly behind me. But there was no one there. I backed away slowly, my hands trembling, and rushed out of the kitchen. My mind was reeling, but one thing was certain: I wasn't alone in that house. I reached out to a local paranormal group, hoping they could help me make sense of everything that was happening. A woman named Claire, who was experienced with investigating haunted properties, agreed to come to the house and conduct an investigation. The night Claire arrived, I was already on edge. She carried with her several tools, a recorder to capture any EVPs, electronic voice phenomena, an EMF meter to detect electromagnetic fields, and a few other gadgets designed to pick up paranormal activity. She began her investigation in the living room, speaking softly, asking questions as she moved about the house. I watched as she worked, her face growing increasingly serious. "There's definitely something here," she said after a while. "The readings are off the charts." My heart sank. I had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made it all the more real. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice trembling. Claire explained that the spirit in the house seemed angry. It was feeding off the energy in the home, growing stronger with every passing day. She said the best course of action was to cleanse the house, perform a ritual to remove the negative energy and send the spirit away. She told me it would take time, but it was possible. That night, Claire performed the ritual. I sat in the living room, watching her as she burned sage and recited prayers in an ancient language I didn't understand. The air grew thick with the scent of burning herbs, and I felt a strange tingling sensation on my skin. The house was heavy with energy, but as Claire continued, the air began to feel lighter. I could almost sense the oppressive weight lifting from the walls. But just as I thought we were making progress, a loud crash echoed from the hallway. I jumped to my feet, my heart racing. Claire remained calm, her face set in concentration as she continued the ritual. But the crash came again, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps, walking through the house as if someone was trying to force their way back in. I stood frozen, unable to move, as the sound grew louder. Claire paused, her eyes flicking to the hallway. She looked at me and nodded. "It's not over yet," she whispered. With one final chant, she raised her hands in the air, and the house seemed to tremble. A deafening silence fell over the room, and for a moment I thought the house had gone completely still. Then the footsteps stopped. The whispers faded. The coldness that had plagued the house began to retreat. We sat in silence for a long time, listening to the quiet. It wasn't until Claire spoke that I realized how exhausted I felt, like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. "It's done," she said softly. "For now." I stayed in the house that night, but I could finally sleep. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted, and the house felt like a home again. It wasn't perfect. There were still shadows in the corners, still an unsettling feeling in the air, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was in control. As the days passed, the house seemed to return to normal. The lights no longer flickered, the coldness receded, and the footsteps became a distant memory. I never heard the whispers again, and the oppressive weight of the house seemed to dissipate. But I knew something had changed. Whatever had been haunting that place was no longer there, but the memory of it lingered in the back of my mind, like a shadow that would never quite disappear. Some nights, when the wind howls outside, I can still hear the faint echo of footsteps in the distance. And though I haven't experienced anything as terrifying as before, I can't help but wonder if the house will ever truly be free. Story the end.